Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button and you can reach me that way as well. In this show, people share their stories of losing a loved one to COVID. Each of these stories is heartbreaking, inspiring, and honest. We are candid about how hard it is to move on from our grief, how we relive the events leading up to our loved one's death, and the difficulties in carrying this loss with us through the political turmoil happening in the world right now and in the face of people who don't believe COVID is real. You may hear things in our stories that make you cry, and you may hear things that make you angry. You might hear us talk about politics or the vaccine, and you may not agree. But I hope you'll keep listening. I hope you'll stay to the end of each episode and realize that each person who openly shares here has experienced deep grief over the loss of a loved one, and that's something we will all experience. We all love someone. We will all lose someone we love, and we will all grieve. These are the stories of those we lost to COVID. Thanks for being here with me today. I've got a great show planned for you. Today, I'll be talking to Lisa in Indiana. Lisa lost her father in March of 2021. Her loss is very recent, and yet she opens up about so much of her life, her struggle with grief, and how difficult her father's long hospital stay was for her and her mom. This is a long episode, but I really encourage you to listen to the whole thing, even if you have to do it over a couple of lunch breaks. I promise it's worth it. We recorded this episode on September 8th, 2021. Lisa mentions that she started an Instagram account to post about her dad and her grief. That account information can be found in the show notes. Lisa told me when I spoke to her on the phone before we recorded this episode that she was an open book. So I don't think she'll mind me saying that her father lost his parents very suddenly when he was 17 years old. Because of this, Lisa's dad talked to her often about death and planning for it. I mean, you're never ready. But because he was so open about it, I think that's why Lisa shares so much in this episode. Some of the medical descriptions in this episode may be triggering, and we do briefly talk about how hard it is to want to go on living when someone you love has passed away. But I cannot say it enough. This entire episode is Lisa's tribute to her dad. You can hear the love she has for him in every single word. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lisa to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on here.
So where I like to start, and in your case, I know that your father passed away in March of 2021, but I still want to go back to March of 2020 because so much changed for everybody then. And you live in Indiana.
Yes.
And do you live in a city in Indiana or in more of a rural area?
So my parents lived in more of a rural area, and I live in a city.
Okay. All right. So you kind of got the experience of what changed there in March of 2020 from a couple different angles, as far
Yes.
as lockdowns and essential workers and stuff. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, and then how your family adjusted in that early time to the pandemic, and what things you changed about how you lived your life, your normal life?
So when the lockdown started and everything, my dad was actually retired, so he was typically always home anyway. My mom was considered an essential worker, and so she was the one she worked the entire thing. Some days, like, she was even working like 7 days a week, which blew my mind because my mom is older. And I was just kind of like, it's exposing you to more. You should stay home. But she was just like, no, I'm going to go. Like, it wasn't a big deal. Um, in both areas, like in the town my parents lived in and in the city that I lived in, it was a really big mix of people who were still like, I'm not wearing a mask. And then like people who are like, oh, this is serious. Like, we need to take this seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of hard because even like I'm only 29. So like my generation, I knew a lot of people that were just like, oh, this is so stupid. Like, this is ruining my life, blah, blah, blah. And then like my parents were like, like, we don't want to, this is not how we want to leave the world. Like, this is not what we want to do. And since my mom was an essential worker, when she would come home from work, she wouldn't go near my dad when she came home. She'd immediately go shower, take her clothes off, wash her clothes every single time she worked. My dad did not have to come in contact with her being out, exposed or anything, or her clothing. When she was working, they were all wearing masks, they were wearing gloves, they were doing everything. And my dad just didn't leave the house. They literally did everything they possibly could to avoid it, which, for all of 2020, they did very well at that. Like, nobody was sick. There were people where my mom worked, customers that would come in and they would flat out tell her like, oh yeah, I tested positive for COVID, but I feel fine. And it's just like, what?
Yeah.
Like, my mom is like 60 something years old and you're like in your 30s, 40s, maybe 50s, and you tested positive for COVID. Oh, well, it could be a fluke. Regardless if it's a fluke positive, which I'm pretty sure that there's more like a chance of getting like a false negative than a false positive.
Yes.
Or if I'm saying that correctly,
Mm-hmm.
then rather than that not being accurate. So regardless if you have symptoms or not, like, you should stay home. But people would tell her, like, flat out tell her, like, oh yeah, I got tested positive a couple days ago. Like, I'm just, I feel fine. So I decided to come to the store.
Wow.
And they were the same people that would have a mask under their chin. And my mom, she's older, like gloved up, masked up, and she's just kind of like, oh. And what can you do? Like, there's nothing, there weren't any, like, I guess, laws, or there were rules, but I guess some people still think even in a pandemic, rules are meant to be broken.
Yeah. And every state seemed to have their own ways of doing things. So you are the first person I've talked to from Indiana. I've talked to plenty of people from the East Coast, where in New York City and New Jersey, especially, there was just this intense, very strong, quick fear because they had such a horrible reaction and so many people sick there that everybody just went home except for essential workers, but everybody was very fearful. Where I live, in Oregon, it was a complete and total shutdown. And it's so odd how different states, there was no cohesive message. And that is part of what I struggled with the most at the beginning. Was there was this government message of, hey, here are some things that we suggest. And yet it was still left up individually to states and sometimes even cities to just decide to do what they wanted. And
yes.
Yeah. And so what did, like when you went to visit your family, your mom and dad, how did you guys do that? Did you create a pod or a little grouping of people together where you spent time together during those months of 2020?
So I am typically, at that point, it was March 18th.
Mm-hmm.
I believe March 18th or 19th, when my job at the time, they had decided that we were going to work they were actually laying us off for that time being, and it was right after mine and my boyfriend's 5-year anniversary. So it was the day after. So I think it was probably the March 19th. But after that, I really wasn't around anybody because I still don't really know anyone where I live. So I was around like my in-laws, my brother-in-law, my boyfriend, and my boyfriend really wasn't around very many people. And so we kind of had this little group of us to where we didn't, that was our group, and we were all honest with each other. Like we weren't going out and doing other things with other people. So like that's who we were around. And then when it came to my parents, I was the only person that went to go see my parents. Like nobody else went over there for 2020. Like it was just my parents and I. And I had been tested once in 2020 and then once again in 2021. And when I was tested then, like, you know, it came back negative. So I felt confident to go see my parents. And if there was even like any type of feeling that I might have, that if I was, you know, around someone that I thought who might have had it, I would stay away from my parents for a couple weeks. Or if my dad, you know, was feeling ill, he'd be like, hey, you know, like now's not a good time to come over. And I really didn't go see my parents as much as I typically would during that time for that very reason, because my dad, you know, I talked to my dad on a daily basis, probably like an unhealthy amount of times, but he would just, you know, he would talk, he was always watching the news. And he would tell me, you know, what was going on, because I wasn't really a big news watcher. And he'd be like, you know, like maybe it's not a good thing if you come over this weekend. And I was like, okay. And like, I understood. It bummed me out because like that was just part of my life, was going to their house, especially on like a weekend day. So you know, I guess you could call it a little pod of us that stuck together during the whole thing. And then there was no one else.
Yeah. And did you get tested for work, or did you just do that of your own accord?
I went on my own because I had a runny nose.
Okay.
And so you know, I had a runny nose. I called my dad. I was like, I have a runny nose. And I believe it was in probably like April or May. And he's like, it could be allergies. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, it could be COVID. And he's like, well, you should go get tested. He's like, there's a testing site on every corner.
Yep.
And I had to like hype myself up because I was like, Dad, go with me. He's like, no. He's like, I'm not getting in the car with you. He's like, you need to find out what you have first. So I went and got tested. I called him. And when they let me know, I was like, it's negative. Can I come over? He goes, I guess. And but yeah, he called me every day. He said, yeah, I don't want this. He was like, this is not the way to go. He's like, you know, and I remember asking him like, what's going on with these people? Like, you know, like, what are they saying on the news? He's like, well, basically it sounds like they're suffocating. And he was like, can you imagine like just sitting there, not being able to breathe? And I go, no, like that just sounds like it sounds like torture. Like if you think about, you know, just putting a bag over your head, you can't breathe. Like I couldn't imagine sitting there for weeks or days and just not being able to breathe. Like that sounds awful. And so that was, you know, that was just a daily conversation about like what was going on. And he was always filling me in on it. And I was like, oh no, like, and that's kind of when I was like worried about my mom. I was like, well, what do we do? And he was like, I don't know. Like my mom willingly wanted to go to work.
Yeah.
So, and they were paying people extra at that time as well. So it was kind of like an incentive.
Yeah. Yeah. And being an essential worker and her being part of the community in that way, it probably helped her cope too, I can imagine. So.
Oh, it definitely did. And it helped her cope, but it didn't help my dad cope. Like, cause he was, you know, at home, there were times that I just wasn't able to come over, especially as the, you know, the year kind of went on. And it helped her, but it didn't help him. So it was kind of like a double-edged sword, but like he knew like why she was doing it. And obviously he fully supported her.
Yeah. So fast forward and go to the beginning part of 2021 when your dad got COVID, and if you want, just go into that and how it happened, and and what that was like for you and your family.
So, I was actually, it was beginning of January, because the last time I saw my dad outside of the hospital was actually December 29th, because it was my mom's birthday. So it was probably one of the first few weeks of January. We were getting ready to go to dinner, my boyfriend and I, and my dad called me because that day and days prior, my mom was having shortness of breath, her chest was hurting, and she had stayed home from work, and it only been like, maybe 2 or 3 days at that point. And finally, my dad was like, you probably should go get tested. So my mom went and got tested, and she had tested positive. My dad called me and was like, your mom has COVID. And my first thought was, I was like, there's a hotel not far from where you live. Go there. Like, it's dog. I looked online. It's dog friendly. Like, take the dogs with you. We'll pay for everything. Just get there so you don't get COVID. And he was like, Lisa, he's like, I can't leave your mother. He's like, I can't leave her by herself. And I go, well, I was like, well, wear a mask inside. He's like, no. And he was like, he was very, very aware of how serious COVID was. But he was like, well, if he's like, I can't leave my wife. He's like, I'm not sleeping in a different room than her. He was like, we're here together. We'll get through this together, kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, like, are you sure you don't want to do? He's like, and he flat out was just like, I'm not leaving your mom. So I was like, okay. My mom was sick, and the second week she started getting a little better. My mom was never hospitalized. She did go to the hospital and have a chest x-ray done. She had like a mild fluid buildup, but like it wasn't anything. It was like a common like pneumonia that we would have, but had COVID with it. The second week, as my mom was getting better, my dad started getting a runny nose. And he's like, I got it. I was like, oh, are you going to go get tested? He's like, no. He's like, I know I have it. And I was like, okay. So he started getting gradually worse. And I remember calling him one night, and I was like, hey, because like I said, I called him an unhealthy amount of times, and it was right before bed. And I was like, hey, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm trying to find the bathroom. I was like, what? He's like, I'm trying to find the bathroom. And my parents lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. They don't have a very big house. Like, you can't get lost in there. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, he's like, I'm just so disoriented and I'm confused. And I go, are you in the house? And he goes, yeah. And I go, why are you what's wrong? Did you take something? And he goes, no. He's like, my fever just gets so high at night for some reason. And that was another thing. As he was getting sicker, his fever would only spike at night. And I had talked to a few people, and apparently that was like a normal thing, because when he was in the hospital, around 5 or 6 is when his fever would spike. And it was while he was at home still, it was getting so high, he was getting lost and confused. And it really worried me, because I didn't want him to go outside to let the dogs out and then get lost in the backyard or something, and be out there, because it was wintertime still, it was cold. I didn't want him to freeze to death because he had a fever and was disoriented. So fast forward to it was a Thursday, and he went to the hospital. They wanted to keep him. They gave him I don't even remember what they were giving for COVID at the time, but they did give him that. And they were like, we want to keep you. And he was like, no. He was like, I'll be fine. Like, they're like, no, we want to like keep you. They tried really hard to keep him, and he was like, no, like, I don't want any part of this. Then that was a Thursday, and then the January 24th, it was, I believe, a Saturday or Sunday, he was admitted to the hospital. His oxygen was at 73. And I remember calling that morning, like I always did, and I was like, like, what are you doing? And he was like, he's like, I think I'm gonna have your mom take me to the hospital. And I go, is it getting worse? Because he would have like good and bad days. Like, some days he would be like, yeah, he's like, I think I'm on the mend, like I feel fine. And then that night would come, he would have a fever, but then the next day he would feel fine. Well, and then this particular, and the 24th was a Sunday, he was like, I can't breathe. He's like, I'm gonna have to go. I'm like, okay. So he went to the hospital. They started him on the high flow oxygen, medicines, everything like that, steroids because he did have the COVID-19 pneumonia. So they started him all that. His heart started going into AFib. So at that point, they did put him in the ICU overnight. He was not on the ventilator yet. They put him in there overnight to get his heart rate back down, and then they let him go back to a regular room the next day. During this time, he's continued to need more and more oxygen every single day. It got to the point where while he was on the oxygen, he would move and he would be out of breath. And he was getting really weak. So then they were like, we're going to put you in ICU. And because his heart kept going in and out of AFib also. So they were like, we're just going to go ahead and put you in ICU. We're going to do the CPAP and the high flow oxygen. They kind of rotated him back and forth with his breathing exercises and everything like that. I remember he went to ICU, I believe, February 4th. And February 5th was his birthday. So I went and spent the day with him. And that was the day that, one of the days, because during this whole time, I was also very fortunate because my mom and I were allowed to go and see my dad in the hospital. We couldn't go at the same time, but we were able to be with him. So he was never alone. At this point, it's his birthday, he's in ICU. And I asked him, I was like, do you think you're going to die? And he goes, Lisa, I hope not. And I was like, do you feel like you're getting better? And he goes, some days I do and some days I don't. He's like, I just can't breathe. And so I spent the whole day with him, and I went and saw him the day after his birthday. And on the day of his birthday, since he was in ICU, I couldn't bring him anything because I always made his birthday or any holiday, like Father's Day, his birthday, Christmas, anything. I made it big for him because like my dad and we were extremely close. Like he was my person, he was my best friend. And I always made it a big deal. And I was really bummed that I couldn't bring him a cake. The year before in 2020, when it was for his birthday, I bought him one of the big 9-pound cakes from Costco before they stopped selling them. And he goes, this is as much as a baby. And I go, yeah, I know. Isn't it great? He goes, no, take some home with you. So I brought him a card of some ladies that I had worked with, made him a card at work and signed it, and, let him know that they were praying for him. Good vibes your way. Like, we want you to get better. And then I had brought him a picture of his little dog and my dad had 2 dogs, a German Shepherd named Jake and a Boston Terrier named Dewey. Unfortunately, I had to rehome Jake when my dad did go into the hospital because my mom was unable to care for him, but he did not have to go to a shelter or anything. He was adopted by a retired canine handler in the city of Lawrence here in Indiana. So he got, he's living his best life. I occasionally talk to them. So they've let me come over and see him, see his house. So he's doing great. And that was one thing while my dad was in the hospital, he felt very, very defeated because he's never had to get rid of a dog. And my dad was the biggest, like, he was like a dog whisperer, like animals loved him. Like, it could be an aggressive dog, but if my dad came around, like, give him a few minutes, like the dog was like, okay, like, I'll let you pet me. So that was a very big defeat for my dad. And, he was very upset about that, but I assured him, he had a great home. And when my dad's brothers would call him, like, he told them, he had a great home. He's like, I feel defeated. But they said the same thing, like, you're getting older after this, when you get out of the hospital, you don't know what you're going to be able to handle. So for his birthday, I had brought him a picture of his 20-pound Boston Terrier and my dad told me, he's like, he said he was a cute little dog. And he was like, you're a pretty girl. Aww. And as he said that, he had tears in his eyes. And he just looked so sad and defeated, sitting in a hospital bed. The next day after his birthday, I had actually brought him an iPad. My boyfriend and I went and bought an iPad, put it on our phone plan so he didn't have to use the hospital Wi-Fi, because I have heard stories of, people, it being so short-staffed and not having enough iPads. the hospital did have iPads. I do want to say, when he was in the hospital, there were like 4, maybe 5 people in the ICU. He had COVID and one other person had COVID, but they had passed away shortly after he had went up there, like a few days after.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very fortunate because he was able, like, his doctors were able to really focus on him. His nurses were able to give him their undivided attention because there weren't that many people at the time in the ICU. I am very grateful for that because I was also able to build a lot of close connections with the people up there during that time. And we had, like, they were very honest with me about everything going on. So the next day we brought him the iPad or whatever. He did FaceTime me before he went to bed that evening. We said our, I love yous, good night. I was like, I'm coming to see you tomorrow. I'll be there tomorrow morning, later in the morning. So February 7th, I called him that morning, and I had actually found on the iPad that was his in the hospital, where I had texted it back. So I probably called him about 8 o'clock that morning on February 7th. And I was like, hey, how are you doing? Like, how's it going? And he was like, Lisa, he's like, I just can't breathe. And I could hear him struggling to breathe into the phone. And I go, okay. I was like, like, what's your oxygen? He's like, I don't know. He was like, not enough. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, I'm going to take a shower and I'll be there as soon as I can. And at around 9:20 is when he had tried timing me 2 times. And I was in the shower and I didn't think anything of it because I had literally just talked to him, and he was FaceTiming me, and I didn't know that could have been that was the last time that I could have ever heard his voice talk to me and tell me he loved me again. Granted, I had just talked to him on the phone, and I was like, Daddy, I love you so much. I was like, keep fighting. We're going to get through this. I was like, I'll be there as soon as I can. He was like, okay. And I was like, I love you, Daddy. And he's like, I love you too, Lisa. And he tried FaceTiming me, and I didn't answer the phone because I was in the shower. And that was the last phone call I ever had with my dad. At 9:31, I had texted the iPad and said, hey, I was in the shower, like, you can call me back. And then, like, literally a minute later, my mom called me and was like, they're putting your dad on the vent. She was hysterical.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my God. I was like, how? I was like, I just talked to him. She's like, well, he, his oxygen's too low. The CPAP machine, the oxygen, high flow oxygen, it's not doing it for him. Like, he has to be vented. So my mom and I rushed up there. They let us go up to see him together. And we met with the doctors that were there that day. And I was hysterically crying at this point because I missed the last phone call that I would ever get from my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed that. And that is something that I have to live with the rest of my life. And I know that it's not my fault. I know that, I didn't know he was going to be vented. I don't know why I didn't answer the phone. The first time I know I didn't hear it. But a part of me honestly hates myself because I feel like I let him down, even though, like, I had just talked to him. The day that we got there, we got to visit with my dad. The doctor wanted to meet with us, and he told us, he was like, he's like, typically when people are in an event, you have 7 days to make a decision. And I absolutely lashed out at this doctor. I was like, no. I was like, I am not going to make a decision on my dad's life in 7 days. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, people typically, cannot be on the ventilator any length of time, because he was explaining to me the effects of the tube down the throat and the lungs. And he was like, your dad has a lot of scar tissue in his lungs. The virus has, destroyed all of the tissue. He does not have, what they called it was reserve air, basically. When you walk up a flight of stairs or you move, like, you're able to catch your breath with that air. And my dad no longer had that because the virus had actually, like, destroyed, like, the little, like, air sacs in the bottoms of your lungs. So he didn't have that at all. And that's why every time if he turned over in bed, like his heart rate went crazy. He was gasping for air. And the doctor was explaining all that. I was like, no. I was like, I'm not doing that. We're not doing that. My mom and I are not doing that. Like we're going to fight for him. So as time, the weeks went on, he did get his oxygen levels to where he was able to get a tracheotomy, and he did get one. He was bleeding a lot when they had initially done it. He was bleeding a lot around where the tube was. So they had decreased his blood thinner. And prior to the tracheotomy, my dad he was waking up while he was on the ventilator. Like at one point I had got there just in time. My mom was there and my dad was awake. He was on a ventilator, and the look in his eyes, like you could see the fear in his eyes. And that was so hard to see because my dad was the strongest person I've ever met. He had been through so much in his life, and to look him in the eyes, and aside from the fact that I knew he was on a lot of medication, like there was fear there of the unknown.
Yeah.
But I was so happy to be there while he was awake. And, he was able to, the doctor that was there that day was like, can you move your feet? Can you move your hands? Like my dad was fully coherent. So he was there, like he was fighting at this point. After the tracheotomy, and they had to decrease his blood thinner because he was bleeding around the tube, at some point he had a stroke on the left side of his brain by his brainstem. And when it happened, they're not sure. They know that, once he stopped bleeding quite a bit around the tube, they did increase the blood thinner to a full dosage again. And at this point, he wasn't moving at all. He did have a little bit of pupil dilation, but not much. And then pretty soon, he went into kidney failure because he was urinating quite a bit. And then all of a sudden one day, my mom and I were lucky to be there together that day. And the nurse had kept checking, when she'd come in and do her vitals and her rounds. And my dad hadn't urinated in like 4 or 5 hours, which is very unusual for him. And due to all the fluids they were giving him, and we noticed he was very swollen. And so they brought in a doctor. It was a kidney specialist. And that's when they told us, he's in kidney failure. And I was like, well, put him on dialysis. I'm not giving up on him. And I told the doctor this, and I was like, I understand that there's a lot going on here, but I also know that there have been miracles where people go through all this and they get to come home, and they can, they might have trouble breathing and might be on oxygen, but that is my goal for my dad. And I'm going to make sure that happens, or I'm going to make sure he gets the chance. So they put him on dialysis. Also at this time, he was on every medication possible for his heart. He was on a medication to keep his blood pressure up. He was on a medication to keep his blood pressure level. He was on 4 different heart medications, and I couldn't even tell you what they were for, but they were basically doing every function for his heart. He was on dialysis. He was on, obviously he was on a feeding tube. He was on everything during this time. And from that point, when he got the trach tube to the day that he passed, he quickly, in his appearance, physically declined every single day. When he had his just the regular trach tube down his throat, he looked very alive. And then after that, it was like he just started melting away. His skin was very sunken in. And they had also did the proning at one point, which that alone was very traumatizing to see, because when they flip you over onto your front side because of gravity, and I had read about it, and it was something they used to do back in the old days, I believe, when people would have pneumonia. I'm not totally sure if that's the correct reason why they did it, but it's so when they would flip them over onto their front side, their gravity wasn't pressing on their lungs, and my dad's lung damage was at the bottom on the back side. So when he was flipped over, his lungs were able to, I believe, to completely like fill up with air that was coming from the ventilator, and it would kind of, I guess, give his lungs a break from trying to collect air. So they would have him on his front side from like, I believe, like 8 to 10 hours, and then they would flip him back over. When they flipped him over, I remember going to visit him, and the nurse stopped me at the door, and he goes, "Your dad is going to look very different." I go, "What happened?" He's like, "We were proning him." And this was the first time. I didn't know they had done this. There was something they had discussed with my mom, but I had told my mom, I was like, whatever they want to do, if it will like help him, like let them do it. So I didn't even know they were doing this. And I had walked in. I was speechless. His eye, from being that on his eyes, his front side that long, his eyes were almost popped out of his head. His head was swollen. Every part of his body, everything on the front side of him was huge. And he looked like he had been like ran over by a car or something. And I was just like, is he going to look like this forever? And they're like, no, like, once the blood kind of goes back and settles, because I knew it. I knew why it happened, but at the time I was in like almost a shock. I was like, I don't understand what's going on. And they were just like, once the blood kind of settles and runs, he's been on his front side for 8 hours.
Yeah.
Like I can't even like hang upside down for like 10 seconds without getting lightheaded. So I
Yeah.
understood it. He did that. They did that for him for a few days. And then my mom was just like, no, like, don't do this anymore, because he looked awful. And every single day, like he had really small arms and legs anyway for being such a big man. But we always called him chicken legs, by the way, because he had really small legs. He had really strong, small legs. And everything on him, like he didn't have any muscles anymore. And I had never been so positive in my entire life while my dad was in the hospital. So I was asking nurses, like, what's the best, like, aftercare home so he can go for a rehab. My dad's on dialysis and every heart medication and every machine to keep him alive. And here I am, like, what's the best rehab? Like, I want to know, like, I want to research it. I want to go meet these people. Like, I'm planning for the future that he's going to be here, because that was all that I could think about. Like, I was not ready to think about him not being here.
Yeah. Yeah. You had hope. You had to have hope.
Yeah. And it's crazy, because that's what so many people I have a friend that's a nurse, and she had worked in the ICU unit at a different hospital. So I was always texting her, and she was asking the nurses that she had worked with that had been there, and so many other, and the preachers that would come in and everything. And that's what everyone told me. Like, even some of the nurses, like, oh, you have to have hope, because if you don't have hope during that time, you won't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had every bit of hope in the world. I had hope. Like, he was going to go to rehab. Like, I was thinking about, like, how can I quit my job and take care of my dad full time? Like, because my mom wasn't able to do it at all, like, for all by herself. And at that time in the hospital, like, my mom was so like, I feel like she was in like a shock the entire time, because my parents had been married for 47 years and my dad did everything. So like, my mom was lost, and she still is. And so I had to take over her life and help her with everyday things. I had to, at this point, make every decision made for my dad's care. And it's not that my mom wasn't capable, but my mom was not in the right place to make any decisions. When the weeks were going on, he was on dialysis, heart medicine, all that. He wasn't having any movement of his limbs. His pupils had stopped dilating. At one point, his kidney functions were starting to get better, and there was like the positive talk of like, if they keep going up, like, we can stop the dialysis for a little bit to see how he does on his own. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, he's getting better. Not thinking at the fact that his lungs, like, they're like, at this point, I had even asked the nurse, I was hysterically crying. I'm like, can I give him a lung? And he was like, unfortunately, like, that's not how that works. And I'm like, I can live with one. Like, I've never smoked. Like, I have healthy lungs. Um, he can have a lung. I was like, he can have a kidney as well. Like, I don't need both. Like, take him. And at the time, the nurse was very, very sweet to me. Thinking back, like, I can see why he was like, that's not how that works, due to the fact that aside from my dad's lungs and kidneys, nothing else was working. That was the sweetest answer that nurse could have given me. So they had started to improve for a couple days, and then one day everything stopped. Like, there was no improvement that day at all. And the days following, there was no improvement. And that's when the doctor was like, I would like to have a meeting with you and your mom. And that's when they told us, we believe he had a stroke. And that's when they'd actually went back and like, we did have to decrease the blood thinner at the beginning when he got his tracheotomy, because he was bleeding so much, because he was bleeding a lot and he had to have like 3 or 4 blood transfusions. They're like, we're going to go ahead and do the test and see, like, if there's any signs of a stroke or anything. There was, and that's where it was on the bottom left by the brainstem. When I was 16, my dad had also had a stroke, but it was on the right side of his brain towards the frontal lobe. And I remember that very well. So they had a neurologist come in, because I was like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Like, he healed from the first stroke, so like he can heal just fine from the second one. Like, I'm not worried about it. Totally brushing off the fact that he was in a coma. Like, nope, he's gonna be fine. And so they called in a neurologist. She did all of the testing that they do to see like brain function. And I didn't know this, but one of them is where they take this metal thing and they like clamp your toe, and your pain receptors in the brain, like if you have a functioning brain and everything's working the way it's supposed to, it will react, and you'll like move, you'll like naturally your body will jerk your foot, or you'll move because of the pain. And they had clamped his toe and like he didn't move at all. And they did it to his fingers. They, shined the light in his eye for his pupil dilation. They did all of that. He did not move at all. They went and did more CT scans and everything. And she just said that it showed that he was in a coma. So I asked, and I was at work that day when she called me and had told me about these test results. And so I was like, run more tests, do it again. And I was very blessed, because these doctors, like, I have them doing the same stuff over and over again. And she was like, I will do that for you. And she was like, I want to meet with you and your mom tomorrow. And I said, okay, great. So we went in the next day, and this was on March 11th. We met with the neurologist, and she went over, showed us the results, which showing me things is a big thing to me, because like, I need to know, like, not that these doctors were lying to me, but like, I had to see it for myself. That was the only way that I was going to be able to get through this, as long as I saw it for myself. So they showed us his chest x-rays. They showed us the newest stroke on his brain. They showed us everything. And they explained to us, he is in a coma. And my first question was like, well, can he wake up? And she was like, he can. There is always a chance of someone waking up from a coma. She's like, I cannot tell you when. She's like, but you have to take into the fact that his body is shutting down because of where his stroke was. And I didn't also know this. If you have a stroke on one side and then you have a stroke on another, it makes the chances of recovering and going back to your quote unquote normal very difficult. Now, if you have 2 strokes on the same side, she said it's never good, but it's better than having one on one side and then one on the other. So she said that basically where his stroke was on the left side by the brainstem, and then on the right side and the damaged tissue from that one, it's making it really hard to get signals to the rest of the body. And she's like, that is why he went into kidney failure. That is why his heart is having so much problems. Everything that they take into account on these things, he wasn't doing anything on his own at this point. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, if he did wake up, like, what's, like, how is he going to be? And she goes, the chances of him waking up, there's always she's like, I'm not going to give you a percentage. She's like, I'm going to tell you that there's always a chance. She's like, but you have to take into consideration, what will his quality of life be? What would he want? And then it hit me, and I stood there and I just screamed at the top of my lungs. And I was like, screaming, like, why? I was like, why are you leaving me? Like, why? Like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you going? Like, why now? And I just stood there and I screamed and I fell onto his bed. And I asked the neurologist, I was like, are you sure? Like, he won't come out of this. And she was like, and she had been, they had told us like that she had been a neurologist for over 30 years. She was one of the best neurologists they had. And she had worked at other hospitals around Indiana. So she knew her stuff, and she was the most beautiful person. And she stood there with us, and she stayed in the room with us as I'm sitting there screaming at him for leaving me. And she answered the same question probably 20 times when I was like, can he wake up? Is he gonna be okay? And she was like, you just have to consider, if you want to keep him here, she's like, you can. She's like, we're not kicking you out of the hospital. She's like, but you have to take a second and look inside. And she's like, why are you keeping him here? She was like, she's like, I'm giving you all of the information that I have, and from studies and everything that had went on for COVID and whatnot. And I can tell you that he is not going to have a quality of life, the quality that he would want or that you would want for your dad. And I asked him, I was like, so he's brain dead. And she's like, we don't use that term. He's in a coma. And that to me was like, yes, that was a solid yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, so he would be, if he woke up, he would just have his eyes open. And she said most likely he would have his eyes open, but there would not be any interaction. He's not going to be able to move, and he's going to be on all of these machines the rest of his life. And thinking of my dad laying in a bed staring at a ceiling the rest of his life, I know for a fact that he would be extremely mad at me if I did that to him, because he always made it very clear to myself, my mom, and his brothers, like, if he didn't have his mind, he didn't want to be here. He was a very independent, strong-minded person. He liked camping, his trucks, his cars, his dogs. Like, he did everything for himself, rarely ever asked for help. So the fact of, knowing that my dad did all of those things and never asked for help, and then the fact that I wanted to keep him alive for my own benefit, to know that he was just here, like his mind was gone, his body was here. And that was when I was like, I have to take him off life support, don't I? And she's like, you don't have to do anything. She's like, take a few days and make it, think it over, make a decision, talk with your mom. And when everyone left the room, I told my mom, I was like, I think I'm ready to let him go. And she's like, well, she's like, as she's crying, she's like, take your time. She was like, go home and think about it. Go to try to get some rest, and we'll come back tomorrow. And as I left, I went ahead and told them, I was like, I want to do it tomorrow. And they're like, okay, like, we'll all be here. Come in and, let us know when you're ready. So I went home that evening and I told my boyfriend, I was like, and I have a very like dark humor kind of person, because that's how my dad was. My dad was very straight to the point and honest, even in like the worst situations. So like I kind of sometimes don't even know like when to not be that way, just because like that's how he was. So like that's how I am. And I went home and I told my boyfriend, I'm like, well, my dad's dying tomorrow. And I just started screaming and crying. And he kind of sat there. He was in shock. And I had always told him, we've been together for 5 years, and I had always told him, like, if something ever happens to my dad, like, I'm not going to be okay. Like, even way before COVID, we got online. My dad had told me a long time ago, like, if something ever happened to me, like, this is where you can have, he wanted to be cremated. He's like, this is where, you can do the cremation, all that. So we were online getting everything set up, paying for it and everything. And I was sitting there screaming and crying, asking my dad, like, why are you doing this to me? I'm only 28. Like, I shouldn't be having to plan my dad's cremation. I should be like 60 planning this, because we always had the ongoing joke that he had to live until he was 90, because I'm not married. Our house is not built yet and I don't have kids. And I wanted him to be a grandfather so bad. Like, my parents would have made great grandparents because they were great parents. And I was like, you can live until you're 90. And then when you're 90, I'll be more ready because you'll be there for all of those things. And he would always laugh and be like, I don't know. He's like, that's an awfully long time. And so it was really hard doing that. And then picking out an urn, I was just kind of like, I was like, why? This is, excuse, I don't know what I could say on here, but I was like, this is absolute bull. Like, I should not be picking out an urn right now. He is not old enough to go. And bless my boyfriend's heart, like, he had never been through anything like this. So he was kind of in his own like state of shock. He didn't know what to say. He was very supportive. It was, he cried with me, which really meant a lot. Not that I ever wanted to see him cry, but he was there in his own way that he is there for people. And I couldn't have asked for someone better to be by my side during such a difficult time. And we got all that done. I had called my mom. She was hysterical. And March 12th came. We went in. We talked with a neurologist again, talked with all the doctors. My dad had two brothers. One lives in Georgia, and he wasn't really traveling, just, obviously because of COVID, and he hadn't had his vaccine yet. And I called my dad's other brother and I was like, hey, we're going to take him off life support today at this time. I was like, do you want to come up here? Like, they're allowing me to have people up here. He said no. He's like, I don't want to see him like that. And I said, okay. Well, I had talked to his daughter and I told her I was like, I really want you to be here. And I was like, I'd like your dad to be here, but he didn't want to come. Luckily, she talked him into it and he did. He was there. My dad was very close to both of his brothers, even the one that did live in Georgia. Like, they talked every weekend. His other brother lived in town with him, and they had actually worked together for probably, I want to say, like 12 years or more before my dad retired. So, he was there, my mom was there, my mother-in-law was there, my boyfriend was unable to be there. And looking back, I'm kind of glad that he wasn't, because being the person that I am, that my dad made me, I want to protect him from seeing awful things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an awful thing. At that point, my dad had all of the bruises from all of the IVs. The tape had absolutely ate his skin up. He looked awful. Like, he honestly looked dead before we ever took him off life support. And as the time that he was in the hospital, I did take pictures of him like on the ventilator and stuff. But when he got that trach tube, I stopped, because those were pictures, like, I never wanted to look at those again, because it was honestly like looking at a dead body. And I was like, no, like, he looked more alive than the other one. So I was like, no, absolutely not. And then now, so I'm kind of like kicking myself about it, but I'm glad that I didn't take those. But I have the ones that I do have. And we took him off probably around like 150. And by 211, he had taken his last breath. The nurses did explain that, when we do take them off life support, the air that is in their lungs will come out and it will sound like they're struggling, but they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, he didn't do any of that, because I'm almost positive I would have heard him, like, would sound like gasping for air. I'd been like, nope, hook it back up, like, he's trying to live. But he had went so quickly and so peacefully. Like, that's when it hit me. Like, I knew that he fought for a long time. And the nurses and doctors told me that as well. They're like, we typically, patients are only here for a couple weeks, and their body quits. She's like, but the nurse there that day, her name was Rebecca, she assured me, she's like, your dad fought until he was not able to fight anymore. Or he would not have been here this long. And the fact that now I think about, did I do the right thing of having him get a trach tube? Because he fought up until he got that tube. Like, he had, brain function and all of that. Like, did I push it too far and have him get that for my own benefit to try to get him to get better? And then that's like, was that my fault? I have so many questions, obviously, that will never be answered. And then I know that aren't my fault. Like, that's not my fault. I'm fully aware that getting him, we didn't know that he was going to have a stroke.
Yeah.
All of those things. Like, I know that they're not my fault, but I blame myself because I was doing the best I could with what information I had on Google. And the blogs that I had read about, people being in a coma for 36 days and then waking up, and they have to go to rehab because they got to gain a little bit of muscle strength back in their legs. But other than that, they're on low flow oxygen the rest of their life, but they're living their life. They're alive.
Yeah.
And that was the stuff that I read. And so every bit of hope that I had left my body. I was like, oh my God, like, what do I do? And so we stayed there at the hospital afterwards. And then I just felt like it was like I felt shameful for leaving him there. But I know that, I didn't want to be there when they came in and put my dad in a body bag to take him to the crematory. Like, I didn't want to be there for that. So I told my mom, I was like, I'm leaving. She's like, you're leaving already? I'm like, well, I was like, I don't really need to be here anymore. I mean, I spent so much time here. And my mom, her and I were polar opposites. I'm definitely my dad's child 100%. And he was a very private, like, if something was wrong, he wanted to be alone. My mom is the kind of person, if something's wrong, she needs to be with people. So that day was very hard because I wanted to go cry alone, but she wanted to cry with me. So I went and stayed with her for the night. And then literally the next day, I got up and I went and got my eyebrows waxed. And I was in shock. Like, I didn't know what to do. Like, I had never, like, my grandma passed away and I was close to her, but it was a totally different state of grief.
Yeah.
Like, my best friend just died. Like, the man that I have spent 28 years with at the time. And I was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna go my eyebrow. I was there and the girl's like, oh, how was your, how are you doing? Like, how was your weekend? And I was like, oh, well, my dad died yesterday. Like, I took him off life support. The poor girl was shook.
Yeah.
Like, she just stepped back and she goes, oh my God, like, you could have canceled your appointment. I'm like, no, it's all good. Like, it's fine. Everything's fine. And looking back, like, I probably should have canceled that appointment because I probably traumatized that poor girl. But it's such a surreal thing. Like, right now with my own grief, I don't, like, sometimes I wonder, like, am I even grieving? Like, am I doing this correctly? And like, I've read so many places online because I did eventually create a Instagram dedicated solely to my dad, and so I can post about my dad and the grief that I feel and things like that and things that happen. Because I was very skeptical at first because, like, I was like, I don't want to seem like one of those people. But then the more that I found other accounts, I was like, oh, like, this is totally normal.
Yeah.
Like, what I'm feeling is normal. So I did that. And I started the Instagram account because I needed somewhere to kind of vent, because I have a really good friend of mine. She lost her mom probably, I think, 7 or 8 years ago now. And she told me, she was like, the week that your dad passed away and then up until whatever service you have, everybody is going to be there for you. People are going to call you. People are going to check in on you. People are going to genuinely ask, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And then afterwards, like the day after, you will not hear from another single person.
Yeah.
And I put that in the back of my mind. And was she right? Like, she still, to this day, I will talk to her, bless her heart, on the phone for like an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And some days it'll be about random things. Other days it'll be about my dad. And she is the most gentle person. And I have 2 people. One is my boss. One is my friend, actually. and that I'm able to talk to. And it's, they're old. I call them like adults, but I'm 29, so I'm an adult too, but like they're adults, like they're older than me. So they lost their parents have passed away. It's been years, but they understand grief. But then there's a completely different grief with COVID.
Yep.
But they still ask me like, are you okay? And it's just wild to me how many people like were there at the time, and now like everyone's afraid to ask me if I'm okay. And like I post things I have my personal Instagram and my dad's Instagram about like, it's okay. Like I want to talk about my dad. Like my dad was my best friend. I talked about him every single day when he was alive. Like just because he's not here doesn't mean I don't want to talk about him. It doesn't mean that I don't want to share memories.
Yeah.
Like, like he is every part of me. So talking to my mom told me the other day, I had said something to her. She goes, all right, Larry. She's like, you sound just like your dad. And I go, well, I mean, I think that's a good thing given the circumstances right now. But it's wild to me that how, nobody wants to talk about death. And I was very fortunate in an odd way. My parents were in their 40s when they had me. So as I got older, my dad would be like, well, I'm not going to be here forever. And I, as a little kid, like, what do you mean? Where are you going? And he's like, well, I'll die one day. And I remember way before COVID times, I was probably like, I was either 18 or 19 or in my very early 20s. And the thought of my dad leaving had always like sometime would pop up in my mind of him passing away. And I'd be like, and I would get super, super sad in the moment. And one day I was sitting at the dining room table with him and I asked him, I was like, if something ever happens to you, like, what do I do? He goes, what do you mean? I go, if you die, like, what do I do? And he goes, well, you'll have to keep going. He was like, you can't give up. And I honestly said to him, I was like, no, I was like, I think I'll die with you. Because I don't know how to live I don't know how to live my life without you. He's like, no, he was like, you can't do that, Lisa. He was like, you'll have to continue to live your life. And then we just kind of moved on to a different conversation. But looking back, I wish he would have like told me what to do, because I'm just as lost as my mom sometimes. Like I can pay bills and do things like that, but I don't have that person there that I talk to every single day that was like my resource for everything in life and my comfort. Like if I were to make a decision, I'd call him and be like, hey, is this like right? And he'd, give me an answer, or sometimes joke. He's like, are you ever going to do anything on your own? I'm like, no, probably not. And now he's just kind of like threw me out here to the wolves. And I'm just like, oh, this is not what I anticipated how this was going to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
And the grief, I think we feel, COVID grief, I mean, it's grief, and I get it's grief. I have a cousin who lost her husband to cancer, and my husband lost his mom 10 years ago, very suddenly. And she just was there one minute and her heart stopped the next. She hadn't treated her body very well over the years, and so that had a lot to do with it, but it was sudden. He and I can't even relate on the level of grief that I feel versus the grief he felt. I don't think he worked through, like, his mom died. Okay, he moved on. He kept working. He kept busy. COVID grief is so different. And then there's the triggers, like comorbidities. It's such a big word, but people will say when because I just blurt out a lot of times to people who don't even ask, my mom died of COVID. I started knitting a year ago, right before my mom died of COVID. I say things like that to just random people because I just want to talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And people they just don't understand what that's like. And then a lot of people that I talk to will say things like, well, what else was wrong with her? Like,
oh my God, yes.
Yeah. Oh, well, she must have had diabetes, or she must have had this, or she must have had that, right, for her to die of COVID. My mom had Alzheimer's from a traumatic brain injury. but because she had a couple serious concussions, and then she had a brain subdural hematoma, which is a bleeding in her brain. And after that brain surgery, she was never the same. But other than that, she was a pretty high spirited, thin, and put together woman. And she fought Alzheimer's for 10 years, and she went down to COVID in 10 days, 12 days, and she was gone. And I don't like that comorbidity question. I don't like how people sort of dismiss our grief like it isn't, like we should just deal with it like regular grief. But you saw so much. You were there every day. You and I didn't see. So my mind, like you saw things. My mind makes a lot of stuff up about my mom
Yeah.
and what the end of her life was like. And those are the things where your story and what you're explaining, so many people like me did not get to be there. And so in a way, I find it beautiful that you were able to be there with him, even though I know that for you there was so much trauma involved in that. It's just we can relate to each other, all of us, on this level of grief and COVID grief that people just don't understand. They don't
Yeah,
understand.
absolutely. And I am fully, after creating that account, having it for just a few weeks, I have talked to so many people, and I fully am so grateful that I was able to be there, because I feel a special place in my heart for people like you and the other people that weren't able to be with their loved ones. I don't think I would have, I don't think I, where, I don't know where I would be if I wasn't able to be there with my dad, and if I wasn't able to be there holding his hand as they took him off life support. That alone, like, not even COVID aside, taking someone off life support and choose and having to make the decision on whether they stay or go, and taking all of these things into account, like, I became a respiratory therapist while I was there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I had learned so much about the human body while I was there. You know, I can't imagine, like, that alone is traumatic and has its own, it has its own grief area.
Yeah.
And I just, I don't know. I don't know how anyone has been able to, and I know it's been extremely hard to get through it because of the people, like you said, well, there must have been something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, as you know, when I was younger, he did have health issues. In 2018, he did have a triple bypass surgery, heart surgery. After that, he literally changed his entire life from eating. He had lost, he was down to like 180 pounds when he went to the hospital. At Before that in his life, at one point he was up to probably 300 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
My dad exercised daily. He ate very healthy. He was really taking care of himself. And in November of 2020, he had went to the doctor for his yearly physical and everything. And I even have the paperwork, like, they wrote on there, like, his doctor wrote on there, like, healthy as can be, with a smiley face. Like, all of his blood tests were coming back great. Cholesterol was good. Like, my dad was healthy, and it really makes my blood boil. What was wrong with him?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what was wrong with him 5 years ago. We're talking about now. Like, COVID is its own thing. Yes, some people that have other illnesses are like more susceptible or things like that, but his medical history has nothing to do with the fact that what he went through with COVID.
Right. Right.
And nobody takes that into account, and nobody cares to, because COVID, some people, it's not real. And the people who say COVID's not real, but then they get COVID, and they're like, oh, well, maybe it is real.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my questions is what do you say to people who tell you or who believe COVID isn't real?
Um, what am I allowed to say on here?
Well,
um,
whatever you want.
Honestly, I've had a few people, and like I said, as I've gotten older, I've become like more of like, I hang out with like a few people, not a lot of people, but there are a few people that I have ran into who have not, they didn't know that my dad passed of COVID, which I wonder like if they would have known, like, would they have been so stupid? But it's kind of like, you know, yes, it's real. I have some photos of a man on a ventilator who I absolutely adored for 28 years. Would you like to see them? Like, would you like to see what a living, healthy man goes to, from like walking and talking and doing all these things to a ventilator and looking dead before he's actually dead? Like, do you want to see those things? Like, do you want to have a conversation with what I and my mother went through while he was in the hospital, of, you know, every couple of weeks having a meeting with a hospital, like with a doctor? Well, his kidneys are failing. Well, his heart, you know, basically isn't doing anything on its own at this point. Like, do you want to talk about those things, or do you want to be ignorant and continue to say like, oh, it's not real? But millions of people have died of COVID, even younger people. So are you going to tell me that, you know, 30-year-old that has diabetes, like, they deserve to die because they had COVID? Like, they really lived their life. They're 30.
Yeah.
They're 40, they're 50. My dad was only 68. And, you know, that might be old to some people. My dad still had an entire life ahead of him, and he had the ability to do anything and everything he wanted to do. So just because 5 years ago he had a triple bypass surgery does not mean in 2021 his life was any less valuable.
Yeah.
The fact that people will, you know, oh, they're older, like, you know, they've had a good run. No, like, no one should think of a human life that way. Like, would you think that way of a baby that has cancer? No, like, that baby deserves to live. That 20-something-year-old deserves to live. People deserve to live regardless of their age.
Yeah.
And the fact that people completely like ignore the fact that, oh, you have COVID, like, there's obviously something else wrong with you, or you never got it.
Yep.
And I have personally met people. I haven't met them, and I know them. COVID's not real. They actually passed away of COVID, and it's just kind of like, I hate that for you and your family. Like, I'm not going to be like you, so I want you, you know, like, condolences to their family's way. Like, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm so sorry you're going through this very secluded, like, club of people who died of COVID. Like, I hate that you're here.
Yeah.
Like, I will be here for you, because I know that having people there for you, especially when you lose someone to COVID, is a very, very far and few between of people that are there for you and people that understand.
Yeah.
It's a very heated debate for me.
Yeah, me too. Even my dad and my stepmom, in the beginning, my dad was just like, it's just a flu. What are they making a big deal about? It's just a flu. And my parents have been divorced for 40 years. When I called my dad and told him that my mom died, and I said she was alone because she was moved into a COVID nursing home, so I couldn't go in there. My mom was deaf, and so the masks, she couldn't read lips. All of a sudden, she's got Alzheimer's. She's moved into this building. She has no idea what's going on. She can't read anybody's lips. They're covered in a face shield and goggles and gloves, and she's had no human touch for who knows how long. And my dad started to cry, and then my stepmom called, and luckily, I can tell at times they're still very frustrated by the entire COVID thing, and my dad sometimes thinks it's a big political thing, but they don't talk to me about it anymore. They don't bring it up to me in a flippant way, and I appreciate that. They can have their thoughts, and that's fine. I just don't want to talk to them about it anymore at all. So yeah, it is isolating.
Yes, and I completely agree with the fact that good for your dad and your stepmom for not bringing that up to you, because I have people in my life who were a part of, you know, my dad passing away, who have still made comments to up until like a week ago, and someone had made a comment, and I just like, I flew off the handle. I was just like, okay, you know, like, my dad died of COVID. If you want to think that whoever's on the TV right now talking about vaccines is blowing smoke and spreading false information, fine, think it. I don't care, because I don't care what goes on in your own mind, but keep your mouth shut. Like, I haven't had Facebook in a long time, and I literally got on Facebook for a week and I saw all the political COVID posts, and I'm like,
Mhm.
I can't deal with this.
Yeah, I
I
deleted
do
mine
not
too.
care. Yeah, I was like, I need to get off for another 5 years. So we'll try it again in 5 or 6 years. Um, I don't care. I want us all to, be healthy, be safe. I want all of that for everyone. But I learned very, very quickly, especially after my dad passed away, there are a lot of idiots out there, and you cannot change every idiot's mind, because
Yep.
you will be blue in the face from saying the exact same thing of COVID's not real. Well, then why have millions of people died? And at this point, I'm screaming at them, and
Yeah.
I'm just like, I want to shake you for being so dumb. Like, if you don't want to do something, fine, don't do it. But like, have the common respect. If you
Mhm.
know that someone's loved one or someone they know has passed of COVID, please keep your comments and keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to combust if you don't make some negative political comment. Like, you're not going to, I promise you, that is the least of your concerns. Most people who have went through this are very aware of what's going on around in the world with COVID and how people are handling it and things that people are saying. So why do you need to add another comment to it when you are very aware of what this person has went through? Like, that is what
Mhm.
blows my mind, and
Yeah.
they should all be punched in the face.
I agree. And I like that.
Like,
Yes. Yes.
they should be, because it's
Yes.
just like, I will be blue in the face talking to you about this. Like, this will shut you up for some time, and maybe like you'll remember next time you go to open your mouth.
Yeah. Oh, so how are things in Indiana, and how are you coping with and I'm making air quotes here, the new normal? A lot of the summertime narrative and a lot of the news and a lot of what, because I don't watch a lot of news, but the little bit that I saw locally is all about this new normal. And here we still have mask mandates inside and out. We have masks in schools. We have, some capacity limits. We have all the social distancing signs up everywhere. So it still feels kind of the same here where I live in Oregon. But I mean, how is it for you, life in this, not post-pandemic, but kind of smack in the middle of this change in the pandemic? What is it like, and how are you coping with that, with your life and work and everything?
So honestly, from the places that I've been in Indiana, it almost seems like nothing ever happened.
Oh.
They do have the social distancing signs. A lot of places, will put, if you've been fully vaccinated, then you don't have to wear a mask. Well, how do you know people have been fully vaccinated, first of all?
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that's a scapegoat to where you don't have to wear a mask and we don't really care. There are places that encourage everyone, including people who have been fully vaccinated, to wear a mask. I've seen some restaurants that are still doing social distancing with tables and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but really, the company that I works for, we sent in our vaccination cards because they will not allow us to travel if we weren't vaccinated. Obviously, I got the vaccine regardless of traveling because, I watched my dad die of COVID. So I was like, I,
Mm-hmm.
don't want to have to put anyone else through that if it happens to me. So they require, even we went 2 weeks and they were like, you don't have to wear a mask, you've been vaccinated. But then when all of the stuff came out that you can still get COVID, even if you've been vaccinated, they were like, no, like, you have to wear a mask. If you are out working and going from store to store, you have to have a mask on. So I have to wear a mask every day, regardless of what I'm
Okay.
doing. But a lot of places and a lot of the employers, different places, some require employees to wear masks, some don't. The companies that I am a vendor for, they require their employees to wear masks, regardless of vaccination status. They have their signs on their door say that, we encourage mask for even people that are vaccinated. But it's not like, like, there are a few places I've been, and I think it depends on the county, that require, like, regardless, like, you have to have a mask to be in here.
Mm-hmm.
So there are very few of those places. But like, they're allowing concerts, they're allowing, game sporting games. They
Wow.
have the stickers on the floor where you're supposed to stand, but like I've seen some of those lines and like they're not 6 feet apart. It's hard. It's really hard because it's like, my parents spent so much the entire time of 2020 preventing trying to not get COVID.
Mhm.
Then my dad gets it, he passes away from it, and then my mom and I are out here and we're like, well, like what do we, like what is going on? Like
Yeah.
people are still dying. And it's such, like you had said before, it's such a controversial thing. Like, I'm not wearing a mask, this is so stupid. And it's just like, okay, well, don't wear one. Like, if I'm and I could be like a quitter in some people's eyes, but at the same time, I'm to the point where I'm going to do what protects me and my family.
Mhm.
If you don't want to do it, don't do it,
Yeah.
because I'm not going to waste every single living breath in my body to talk to an idiot.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, I hate the fact that I'm here, but like my dad always told me, like, you can't help stupid people. Like you can't, you can give them the information, you can give them the tools, you can provide the things that will protect them. And there's always going to be people that are like, nope, not doing it, not
Yeah.
doing it, not doing it. Okay, then don't do it. Well, if you get sick, like I'll be here for you because that's the kind of human I am. But like, you could have prevented this.
Yeah. A couple more questions that I have for you. I know the reason why you and I connected was you had posted about your mom being in the hospital. And
Yeah.
for me, I lost my mom, and she and I had a complicated relationship. But at the end, I feel like I got to know her true soul, because Alzheimer's stripped everything else away. And I'm so grateful for that. But your mom and your dad were married for 47 years, and she is struggling emotionally without him. And you're helping. I mean, you're helping to take care of her after having been there just so recently for all of your dad's care. So what is that like?
It is very mind numbing and physically and emotionally draining. The post that you had saw, my mom was put into a mental health care facility for, I believe it was about a week, because she had attempted suicide. From the time that my dad passed away to just a few weeks ago, my mom had went to the hospital a few other times and had told them, like, she went for something totally different, but it was my mom's way of reaching out for help. My
Mm-hmm.
mom has always had mental health issues that had never been dealt with. So all of this happening has really it was, the tip of the iceberg. And she would go to the hospital for her foot, and she'd also tell them, like, hey, I'm really depressed, like my husband died. And I got in contact with the social worker, and she had helped me find all of these mental health facilities, like psychiatrists, counselors that took her insurance, but either they weren't taking in person, they would only do telehealth. And my mom
Uh,
is 60 something and she has no idea how to use a piece of equipment.
right.
And I can't be there every time she has an appointment to set her up with an iPad or a computer or something. So, it got to the point where things were spiraling down fast, and she had made an attempt, and she willingly, the ambulance came and everything, they took her to the hospital to get assessed medically, and she is okay from that. And then they asked, they're like, she willingly wanted to go and get help. My mom knew, she had told me for a very long time, like, she's depressed, she doesn't feel right. And I did everything that I could as her daughter, calling places, trying to get, people lined up for her, all of this stuff. And it's just amazing how there are so many places, but nobody's taking patients. And I understand, like, we're all struggling, but you know, she did eventually see someone and told them, like, she was having, I think it's called suicidal ideation, where you think about dying. And they sent her home and they're like, we're going to monitor this.
Oh,
And when I read that in her chart, I was just like, what in the world? Like, she's sitting there telling you, like, she's thinking about going to sleep and never waking up again. You're going to send her home with no medication, and we're going to watch it. We're going to watch it. Okay, well, great. Thank you for your help. But luckily, the place that she had ended up going to is a great facility here in Indiana. It's actually through the hospital that my dad was at. So my dad was at St. Vincent of Carmel. That St. Vincent, I personally think, is an amazing hospital. I know that my dad had exceptional care. And then the hospital that my mom had went to was through St. Vincent's. And I had talked to a few people and they're like, oh yeah, like their program is amazing. I'm like, thank goodness. I hate that this had to happen the way that it did for my mom to get help. But she is getting help now. She is on medication. She is coming to she's very still grieving. Like there are some nights, this past weekend was Labor Day weekend. My dad loved camping. I grew up at campgrounds. Like we always camped like every single weekend. My parents would get off on Friday, we'd go camping for the weekend. Like that was our lives. My best memories are from camping. So my parents had reservations to go camping for Labor Day, and my mom had called and canceled them a few weeks ago, and she was very upset this weekend.
Yeah.
Which they say that, the first holidays are typically like, some of the hardest. So she was very upset this weekend. But she is doing an intensive therapy program with them. So she I'm not going to say she's doing better. She's doing better than what she was. I don't expect, given the fact that, they were married for so long, that like one of the things that their doctors had told me is like, my mom doesn't have her own identity because, and I guess this is normal for that generation. You got married when you were a teenager and that's all you knew.
Yeah.
Like you didn't know anything else. Like it wasn't like today where you date like 20 people and you might marry one of them and you might not, and you still get to meet other hundreds of people. Like things were different then. And, like my dad was the one who he took care of the bills. He took care of everything for her. And, when I was younger, my mom didn't work and my dad did. My dad had gotten injured on a job, so he was retired, and now my mom worked. My mom loves working. That's one thing that she's very good at doing. She loves her job. She loves the people she works with. Her customers love her. She is going to go back to work, and we think that'll be very beneficial to her when she does, because her thing is like she doesn't like being alone. So that kind of puts us in a whole different thing about, is she going to end up in assisted living? That's like a whole other thing that we have to figure out. But I'm proud of her. When she did go to the facility, she admitted a lot of things and how she had been acting and treating people. And just doing that alone was a huge thing for me, because it's been something, I guess it was kind of validating, because that's what I've been trying to get for my whole life, because my mom and I weren't very close. We were close when I was little, but getting older, I had just grown to know like my dad would always be there for me no matter what. So I was naturally just close to him. Like he was the person that I knew that was never going to leave me or anything like that. So now my dad passes away, and then I get thrown into like, I have to have a relationship with my mom. And a side note, a lot of people told me like, you can just walk away from her. And I'm like, I know, I really can't though. Like,
Yeah.
that's my mom. Like she gave
Mm-hmm.
birth to me. Like we don't have like an A1 relationship by any means, but like I'm not going to be like, well, you're on your own. Like a woman who can't pay her bills and gets confused because, they're on a 30-day cycle. And by the time she pays one, the next one's there. Like I'm a human being and I have feelings for other human beings. Like I don't want to see anybody hurt, struggling, sick, anything. So the fact that someone can tell me like, oh, it's just, like I get it, it's your mom and she's toxic, but like you can walk away from her and like never talk to her again. What?
Yeah.
Like, I'm
Wow.
sorry, we are not
Mm.
on the same like level of life here. Like, I don't know what happened to you to make you think that's okay. But, and at one point I really was thinking of, it had gotten so bad that I was like, I told my mom, like, I have to walk away, because it does get to a point where it consumes you mentally and physically. And the stress from everything that was going on was making me very sick. And I guess I should say I do see it, but the fact that like the terms that they were saying, well, you can walk away, was because I was like, oh, I got to make sure my mom's bills get paid. Okay, I'm not going to walk away from her because she can't pay her bills. Like, I can set them up on automatic payments and pay them for her. The fact that like she is mentally draining and manipulating me, that is a completely different thing. And that was where we were at. But now, like, you know, this past weekend, we spent like the whole Saturday together. And typically before, we could spend maybe 2 hours together and we would start screaming at each other. But this past Saturday was actually a very lovely Saturday for us. And it made me very happy. Like, you know, I know that my dad isn't physically here, but I know that my dad is here, and he is very happy. Because one thing, when we were in the hospital, he asked me, he goes, are you and your mother ever going to have a normal relationship? And I go, no, probably not. And I hate that I said it when I did, given the circumstances. But now, like, I know that, like, my dad, I have the best guardian angel, and that's how I have to look at things.
Yeah.
And I know that my dad sees it. And I know that he knows that we're both making an attempt to make something so dysfunctional be somewhat functional so we can have a relationship, because I don't want anything to happen to my mom. And I'm just thankful that we're where we're at with her care. I see someone. So things are looking more up than they have been in the last few months, for sure.
That's good. That's really good. One last question I have, there's a lot of different memorials. There's traveling memorials, there's the Yellow Heart Memorial, there's the permanent memorial that's being put together in New Jersey. Have you submitted your dad's name to a national memorial of any kind?
So there is a page I found on Instagram. It's called Who We Lost USA.
Mm-hmm.
And I did submit a story to their website. They had mentioned that, like, if they get enough, like, they want to kind of turn it into a book. I did donate to another one, like Remember Me Yellow, I believe it is. Her name's Annette. That is her name. And she was selling yellow heart pins, and it was something for a memorial in Europe, I believe. And that was at the very beginning, right after my dad had passed away, and I didn't really know, like, the United States was really doing anything. So I was like, well, I'll just donate to Europe. That's fine. And then I had also found a page that I believe it's in, I want to say it's in either Alabama or New Jersey. Her name is it's something Remy.
Yeah, Rima.
Yes. I'm so sorry I said that wrong. I'm actually ordering bears for her. So, fun fact, my dad, as he got older, got into like camo sweatpants and stuff. When I was like a teenager and he would come into my work, I'd be like, oh my God, I'd be so embarrassed. And then, like, one day I saw him like walking in. I'm like, he's such a cute old man in his little camo pants. Like, Daddy, you wear those wherever you want to wear a pair of camo pants to my wedding one day. You do that. Like, you wear those. So when I finally accepted it, I started buying him like various camo styles and like better material pants and short. And he even had some fleece shorts that were a black camo. But I'm going to send those in and have those made into teddy bears. And I'm going to keep that bear. So when I have my first baby, one day I can give that bear to them, and, like, you know, they can have their grandpa, part of their grandpa with them. So, but yeah, I thought I saw that. I'm like, oh, like, take all my money. Like, I will have bears galore. But yeah, I've looked into a lot of it. I wish that there was something here in Indiana, because, like, I would be on top of that if there was. And I'm also just not like I have a lot of like thoughts and like, oh, I want to do this stuff, but like I don't know where to begin, and I don't even know who to contact. So I just kind of like wait until I see something. I would love for something to come to Indiana, or to be able to donate for something towards something in Indiana. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I would love to see a fully recognized national memorial where we could all go in the United States. And I don't know how it could ever happen, but some sort of world memorial where all those names are. It's a lot of names. It's over 5 million people, and well over 600,000 in the United States. So I was just wondering, there are a lot of them out there. There's none here in Oregon. So I like to ask about that, just because some people just they don't know. I mean, there's those beautiful yellow heart pictures that someone draws somewhere, and I haven't even found out how to get one of those drawn of my mom. But I appreciate so much you taking the time to talk to me today.
Absolutely.
You because your dad died in March, you're coming up on a lot of firsts, first Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I'm sure you've kind of had these thoughts and know that other people go through these things. And it's just a regular part of grief, because my cousin went through it when her husband died. He died of cancer. And she said, I'm glad he passed away November 1st, because then we just got Thanksgiving and Christmas over with really fast. And at the time I thought, oh, but I get it. I get it now. And I'll be thinking of you and your mom and your family as you go through this whole year, because it's a big year. And
yeah, we just did the first Mother's Day, Father's Day, and my birthday.
Yeah.
My birthday was probably the hardest, because every single year I would call him on my birthday and I'd be like, you know what day it is? He'd be like, no. And I'd be like, oh. He'll be like, happy birthday. Or he'll tell me that he always acted like he didn't know. It was just what we did every year. And I'd be like, or I call and I'd be like, is today the best day of your life? And he'd be like, I reckon. And it was just, like, it was just what we did. And we did it every single year. And this year, I called my mom and I did the same thing to her. And of course my mom was like, oh yes, this is the best day of my life. And I love my mom. It was great, but it just wasn't the regular, like, oh, I don't know what day it is. It's July 9th. Like, what is this? And Father's Day, like, he wasn't a materialistic person at all, but I always made like Father's Day, his birthday, anything a big deal. And it was hard because last year was last Father's Day that I got to spend with him. And my boyfriend and I got him this fancy garden hose reel because he was sick of the cheap plastic ones. And it had wheels on it. And he was like, oh, he's like, this has some all-terrain wheels on it, or something stupid. But he was so happy for his little garden hose reel and stuff. And these holidays have been hard, but yeah, I'm dreading Thanksgiving and Christmas for sure.
Yeah. Well, you can always reach out to me. And now that there's a community of us out there,
it's very helpful.
Yes, so helpful. And all of this and everything that you've shared, and just the honesty coming from, your heart and your soul, and your dad, he was your person, but you were his person. When he needed you the most, you were his person. And it's beautiful, beautiful what you've shared today. And I know it will help so many people. Listening has helped me so much. So I appreciate you taking all this time to talk to me today.
Thank you for having me on here. It means a lot to share and be able to just talk about it, since it's something that I don't get to talk about very much.
Yep. That's how it goes. And it just helps. It helps in the weirdest way. It helps so much. So
it definitely does.
Yeah. And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. If you like this episode, please share the show. Share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, rate and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And then go rate it on Apple Podcast, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.